Hi ho, how's it going? We're talking about, well, stupid things today. Review scores is the topic, is what I mean. What are they? What do they mean? What don't they mean? All that good stuff. Because, well, people have been acting kind of silly over the last couple days. Jim Sterling's under fire again, and this isn't going to be defending him necessarily. I mean, honestly, I kind of agree with his points, but still, this isn't about Jim Sterling as much as it is trying to explain to people what reviews are and what review scores are, how they can be personalized, and how they don't necessarily have to agree with you all the time. And this is coming from someone who's written reviews in the past, who has had reviews on places like Metacritic. So I just want to get involved in the conversation because I'm a metally nosy little jerk sometimes. Alright, so if you don't know what's going on, basically, good old Jim Sterling has come under fire again. He's been getting things like death threats and some very angry people calling for him to be taken off Metacritic because he gave The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild a 7 out of 10. And that's not acceptable because that game has to be an 8 out of 10 or higher at least. Seriously, I saw a comment that said something like that. Is that not a little bit insane to anyone else? Like, I feel like if you can't handle that someone liked a video game a little bit less than you should probably not be on the internet at all or not interact with people that actually have opinions. Instead, you might want to go and play like The Sims or anything because they'll do whatever you tell them to, and they usually don't talk back to you. And if they do, you can just go and drown them in the pool. That's pretty good way of dealing with Sims and your issues in life. Don't drown people in pools in real life. That's not what I'm saying. But it is very dumb to get involved so heavily when someone gives a game that you like a slightly lower review than you would have. And let's be real here. Giving a video game a 7 out of 10 isn't a big deal. That's a good video game on most scales of review. I'd say most, we'll get into that in a second, but people have this notion, and I've actually seen comments and replies and people that are absolutely serious about this. They say that reviewers think that any game that's less than an 8 out of 10 is completely worthless and completely crap. That is not the case. I can tell you that from personal experience, and I myself am a very harsh reviewer. You know, I'm someone who doesn't believe in giving out 10 out of 10s, so even if I had reviewed The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, I still wouldn't have given it a 10 out of 10 just on the principle of the matter. Because to me a 10 out of 10 is a perfect video game with nothing wrong in it at all, which is never gonna happen. Every game has some sort of flaw to it, and people always bring this up. Yes, Pong has a flaw. Pong's flaw is that you get bored playing it after 5 minutes, so it's not a perfect video game either. But what I'm saying is that that's my personal reviewing preference. You know, that's how I score reviews, and to some reviewers, I don't know any that do think this way, but there must be some out there. Any game less than an 8 out of 10 must be total crap, and it must be worthless to any consumer at all. To me, that's not the case. A 7 out of 10 game is a game that functions properly and is fun, but has a bunch of glitches or a couple mechanics I don't like. You know what a 7 out of 10 game to me is? And this might shock you a bit. Skyrim is a 7 out of 10 game. Like the vanilla version of Skyrim, which is my favorite game of all time. If I were reviewing that, I would end up giving it a 7 out of 10, because while it might be an amazing experience that I get lost in all the time, that game is jank as hell. It's broken everywhere. And that doesn't make it bad, you know? Even a 6 out of 10 game, that doesn't make it bad. There are plenty of reasons why a game can be scored lower than another one. Maybe personal preference comes in. Say, people have been bringing this up too. Jim Sterling rated Dead Rising 3 and 4 higher. Maybe he just enjoyed those video games more. Because a review, especially in video games, isn't necessarily saying that this game is good or this game is bad. A review, most of the time, I would wager, and this is how I write my reviews, this is how Jim Sterling writes his reviews, how most sensible people who write reviews create their reviews. when you're reviewing a game, you make it based on how much fun you had playing the game and what your personal preferences are. It doesn't necessarily indicate whether or not the game is even good or bad. Now, you can say that a game is good or bad objectively to a certain degree, but at a certain point you start putting your own personal preferences in, and things that might have annoyed you in some games that might have not annoyed you in other ones, that can really have a big impact on how much you enjoy game A over game B. Even though they might be similar concepts, there could be ways of dealing with situations that you preferred in game A over B or vice versa. And let's be real here, 7 out of 10 is not a bad video game. Like, it's not. Basically, a 7 out of 10, in my eyes, just says that it's a good video game, it's got a few flaws, and some people might not be able to get past those flaws, but for the ones that do, they might really enjoy it. And for the most part, I think that's what Jim Sterling's review was saying. I mean, yeah, I read the review, and he liked the game. He liked your video game, and yet you're still calling for him to be taken off Metacritic because you don't agree with his scores. Like, that's the most petty thing I've ever heard of. And this isn't an isolated thing. I mean, I get comments on my channel. I'm sure I'll get comments on this video saying that I don't know what I'm talking about. I really do on this one, I swear. And people need to just understand that everyone has their own subjective opinion that they can mix with some objective facts as well. Maybe like Jim Sterling doesn't like how Breath of the Wild runs on the Wii U or on the Nintendo Switch. Maybe he doesn't like the fact that there's frame drops to it. And that's an objective fact, that there are frame drops in Breath of the Wild. But you can also mix in the subjective fact that Jim Sterling doesn't like that there's frame drops in it. It bothers him more than it might bother other people, and maybe that's a reason that he would score the game lower for having those, whereas in another game that has, like, frame drops in it, maybe it doesn't bother him because there's other things in the experience that draw him in more despite that. So are we all in agreement at this point that issuing death threats over someone for a 7 out of 10 review score is really stupid? Good. Okay, awesome. Now, as your reward, I'm going to teach you how to get the most out of the reviews you read and make sure that the person writing the review isn't trying to con you, as you seem to think that he might be. Okay, so here's a little tip and a secret for you. If you're trying to figure out whether or not you should buy a video game and you're reading a review, I highly recommend that you go and look at the other reviews and actually read them to see if you agree with that reviewer. So you look at something like a Zelda review, and you read through the whole thing. You're trying to decide whether or not that you're going to enjoy the game as much or less than the reviewer did. Well, here's a tip. Go and see their reviews for other games that you really liked or games that you really disliked, and then read through the entire review. And if they mention the same things that you disliked about it, or the same things that you liked, then you can kind of get a better gauge as to whether or not you are going to agree with them, and whether or not that they should be someone that you follow as a reviewer. Because, you know, video game reviews aren't necessarily about validating your own opinions on something. I mean, you have your own opinions, they're perfectly valid already. Video game reviews are first and foremost to give people the necessary information that's whether or not they should be buying a video game, whether or not they're going to get their money's worth out of it. It's a crazy concept, I know, but that's what reviews are for. They're not for tooting your own horn, they're not for validating others or taking a giant stand against Nintendo by rating their game 7 out of 10, which is still good. It's not any of that. It's someone's experience with a video game that you value because you're trying to figure out whether you like that video game or you want to see if other people liked it as much as you did. And sometimes they're not going to. But that's life. Sometimes people don't like the same things you like, but if you go and yell at them and call them a cuck and all this stupid stuff, well, people probably aren't gonna like you either. That's a little Patty advice. Take it or leave it. You should probably take it if you want people to like you.